Chapter 1. Crossroads. The late afternoon sun cast a golden hue across downtown Phoenix, painting the skyscrapers in warm tones as the workday began to wind down. A gentle breeze rustled through the palm trees lining Central Avenue, carrying the faint scent of exhaust and blooming jasmine. The city thrummed with a vibrant energy, a symphony of car horns, distant sirens, and the chatter of pedestrians spilling out from restaurants and shops. Marcus Hayes, a retired Marine reconnaissance veteran, strolled along the sidewalk. His gait relaxed yet purposeful. He was dressed casually in a well-worn denim jacket, a plain black t-shirt that subtly hinted at the muscular frame beneath, and a pair of comfortable cargo pants. His worn leather boots made a soft, rhythmic sound on the pavement. A canvas backpack, faded and bearing the marks of countless journeys, was slung over his shoulder. He was heading towards a used bookstore a few blocks away, a small haven of quiet amidst the city's relentless pulse. He'd been meaning to get his hands on a first edition of Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian that the store owner had told him about, a treat he'd been promising himself for weeks. His mind, usually a tightly controlled space of strategic thinking and calculated risk assessment, was unusually calm. Retirement had been an adjustment, a jarring shift from the adrenaline-fueled intensity of combat to the relative monotony of civilian life. But he was slowly finding his footing, discovering new ways to channel his energy and utilize his skills. As Marcus approached the intersection of Central and Monroe, the sharp squeal of tires pierced the city's ambient noise. He instinctively tensed, his senses sharpening, his body reacting on ingrained reflex. It was the sound of a police cruiser braking hard, too abruptly. He hadn't even registered the sound fully when a black and white Ford Explorer, emblazoned with the Phoenix Police Department logo, lurched to a halt at the curb. A uniformed officer, Officer Derek Harding, emerged from the driver's side, his movements deliberate, almost theatrical. He was a man in his late 30s, with a square jaw, closely cropped brown hair, and eyes that seemed to hold a perpetual air of suspicion. He wore his uniform crisply, his belt heavy with the accoutrements of his profession, a sidearm, a radio, a baton, and a can of pepper spray. He stood for a moment, his gaze sweeping across the intersection, assessing the scene, before settling on Marcus. "Hey, you," Harding barked, his voice carrying the unmistakable weight of authority. The volume was unnecessary, calculated to draw attention. Marcus paused, his hand instinctively reaching for the strap of his backpack. He turned his head slowly, his expression neutral, his eyes locking onto Harding's. Years of training had taught him to mask his emotions, to present a calm, unreadable facade, even when his senses were screaming danger. "You in a hurry there, buddy?" Harding continued, his tone laced with an almost casual contempt. He took a step closer, his boots thudding heavily on the pavement. "Mind telling me where you're headed?" The question hung in the air, thick with unspoken accusations. Marcus felt the subtle shift in the atmosphere. The flow of pedestrian traffic slowed, curious eyes turning towards the unfolding interaction. He noticed a few people discreetly pulling out their phones, their fingers poised to record. The city was a stage, and this was a performance everyone was suddenly watching. "Just keep it calm," Marcus thought, his internal monologue a steady hum beneath the surface. "Don't give him anything to work with." "Just heading to the bookstore," Marcus replied, his voice even and controlled. He made sure to keep his hands visible, his movements slow and deliberate. Harding's lips curled into a sneer. "Bookstore, huh? That bag you're carrying, what's inside? Anything I should know about?" The implication was clear. Anything illegal, anything dangerous, anything that justifies me harassing you. Marcus felt a surge of anger, a familiar heat rising in his chest. He knew the game, had seen it played out countless times, witnessed the subtle, insidious ways in which power could be wielded and abused. But he also knew that reacting impulsively would only play into Harding's hands. He took a slow, measured breath, focusing on maintaining his composure. He could feel the weight of the city around him, the collective gaze of the onlookers, the unspoken judgment. He was a black man in America, and he knew that even in broad daylight, even with nothing to hide, he was vulnerable. Don't give him the satisfaction, he told himself. Want to take a look? Marcus asked, his voice steady, almost challenging. He met Harding's gaze directly, refusing to back down. Harding's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening. He clearly hadn't expected that response. He paused, his hand hovering near his service weapon. He could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, judging him, waiting to see what he would do. He'll be the one asking the questions, Harding snapped, his voice losing its casual tone, replaced by a sharper, more aggressive edge. He took another step closer, invading Marcus' personal space. Drop the bag. Marcus stood his ground, his expression unchanged. He knew he was being baited, being provoked. He could feel Harding trying to push him, to force him into a reaction that would justify an arrest. "All right, officer," Marcus said, his voice remaining calm and respectful. "Let's do this the right way." He carefully removed the backpack from his shoulder, holding it out toward Harding. He made sure his movements were slow and deliberate, avoiding any sudden gestures that could be misinterpreted. Harding snatched the bag, his grip tight. He seemed almost eager to escalate the situation. He held the bag away from him, his eyes scanning Marcus for any sign of resistance or aggression. "Hand behind your back," Harding barked, reaching for the handcuffs on his belt. Marcus raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement flickering in his eyes. "Am I under arrest?" he asked, his voice measured and controlled. "You're being detained." Harding shot back, avoiding the direct question. "You fit the description of someone we're looking for." The absurdity of the statement hung in the air like a stale joke. Marcus glanced at the crowd, noticing the incredulous expressions on their faces. He could almost hear their collective sigh of resignation. "Here we go again." He gave a slow nod, his lips curving into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "All right, Officer Harding," he said, stepping closer, but keeping his movements deliberate. "Let me help you out." Harding stiffened, his hand instinctively moving closer to his holstered weapon. "Stay right there." Marcus stopped, raising his hands slightly, palms open, a gesture of compliance. "Relax," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "I'm just giving you my ID." He reached into his back pocket slowly and carefully, pulling out a small, sleek wallet. From it, he extracted his military ID and held it out for Harding to examine. Harding hesitated, glancing down at the card. He scrutinized it closely, his eyes scanning the name, the rank, and the words United States Marine Corps, reconnaissance emblazoned on the ID. His smirk faltered for the briefest of moments. "You still think I fit the description?" Marcus asked, his voice as calm as ever, but now edged with a subtle undercurrent of defiance. The crowd leaned in closer, sensing the shift in power dynamics. Phones were now openly recording, capturing every word, every gesture, every nuance of the unfolding drama. Harding, clearly flustered, clenched his jaw and tossed the ID back to Marcus. "This doesn't mean you're above suspicion," he muttered, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. "Stay put while I check your bag." Marcus crossed his arms, a small smile playing on his lips. He didn't say a word, but the look in his eyes spoke volumes. "Go ahead and try to dig yourself out of this hole." Harding turned his attention to the backpack, fumbling with the zippers. Marcus took a small step back, his calm demeanor now laced with a quiet confidence that felt almost theatrical. "Make sure to show everyone what you find," Marcus said, gesturing towards the growing audience. He wanted to ensure that Harding's actions were fully visible, that there would be no room for misinterpretation or distortion. The tension in the air was almost palpable, a thick, heavy weight pressing down on everyone present. Harding crouched slightly, pulling open the zipper of Marcus' canvas backpack. Chapter 2. The Contents. The crowd leaned in, their phones trained on the scene like paparazzi catching a scandal. The street hummed with anticipation, the city's symphony momentarily muted by the unfolding drama. Inside Marcus' bag, the contents were neatly organized, a testament to his military training. Everything had its place, its purpose. A meticulously folded copy of Blood Meridian, a stainless steel water bottle, and a well-worn laptop sat side by side. Harding hesitated for a moment, his fingers grazing the book before pulling it out. He held it up, as if expecting it to explode. "What's this?" Harding demanded, his voice still carrying a hint of suspicion. Marcus raised an eyebrow, his expression one of mild amusement. "That's a book," he replied dryly. Harding glared at him, his grip tightening on the book. "Don't get smart with me. What's it about?" Marcus remained unfazed. "It's a historical novel. It's about the American West." Harding examined the cover, his eyes scanning the title and the author's name. "Never heard of it," he muttered. "It's a classic," Marcus said, his tone suggesting that Harding's ignorance was hardly surprising. Harding flipped through the pages, his eyes searching for something incriminating. He seemed disappointed when he found nothing but text. "You like a read?" "Huh?" Harding said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Didn't peg you for a bookworm." Marcus shrugged. "Everyone has their hobbies," he replied. Harding tossed the book back into the bag with more force than necessary, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. "Cut the attitude," he snapped, his tone more defensive now. "This isn't over." Marcus raised his hands in mock surrender. "Hey, you're the one making a scene," he said, his voice calm, but with an edge that made it clear he wasn't intimidated. "I'm just trying to go about my day." Harding ignored the comment and continued rifling through the bag, pulling out the laptop next. He inspected it, as if expecting to find something incriminating. He flipped it over, examined the ports, even ran his fingers along the edges, as if searching for a hidden compartment. When that failed, he set it aside and moved to the last item, the stainless steel water bottle. He unscrewed the lid and sniffed it cautiously, as if expecting to detect the faint odor of illicit substances. "Water," he announced, his tone almost accusing. "That's right," Marcus replied, his voice laced with amusement. "I try to stay hydrated." Harding slammed the lid back on the water bottle, his frustration now palpable. He was running out of options, his plan unraveling before his eyes. "Anything else you want to check, officer?" Marcus asked, his tone polite but laced with quiet challenge. Harding glared at him, his face flushed. He knew he was being mocked, that the crowd was laughing at him. "I'm not done yet," he growled, his voice low and menacing. He reached back into the bag, running his hands along the bottom, searching for something he might have missed. He pulled out a small, unassuming item, a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it carefully, his eyes scanning the contents. It was a receipt from a local coffee shop, detailing the purchase of a black coffee and a blueberry muffin. Harding stared at the receipt, his face a mask of confusion. He seemed unsure of what to make of it. "What's this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus sighed, his patience wearing thin. "It's a receipt," he replied, his tone exasperated. "I bought a coffee and a muffin this morning. Is that a crime?" Harding crumpled the receipt in his hand, his frustration boiling over. He knew he was losing, that he had underestimated Marcus. "You're free to go," he barked, stepping back as though trying to regain his authority. Chapter 3. Demand for Explanation. Marcus didn't move. Instead, he crossed his arms and raised an eyebrow, his gaze unwavering. "Not so fast," he said, his voice low but commanding. "You stopped me, accused me of fitting a description, rifled through my personal belongings in front of all these people. I think we're owed an explanation." The crowd erupted in agreement, voices calling out phrases like, "What's the reason?" And "You can't just walk away from this." Phones were now pointed directly at Harding, their owners waiting for his next move. Harding shifted uncomfortably, his earlier bravado slipping under the weight of the crowd's scrutiny. He could feel their judgment, their anger, their collective demand for accountability. Marcus stood tall, calm, and unflinching, his mere presence making it impossible for Harding to brush this off. He was a wall, an obstacle, a challenge that Harding couldn't simply ignore. Harding's face was a mixture of frustration and unease. He glanced at the crowd surrounding him. The sheer number of phones recording his every move seemed to shrink the air around him. His earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by a growing realization that he was now the one under scrutiny. He was no longer in control of the narrative. Marcus locked eyes with Harding, the silence between them stretching out like a challenge. He knew that Harding was searching for a way out, a way to salvage the situation without admitting his mistake. "You're not going to answer?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying effortlessly over the murmur of the crowd. "What's this description I supposedly fit?" Harding opened his mouth, but no words came out. The truth was glaringly obvious to everyone watching. There had never been a description, just an excuse, a justification for prejudice. "Let me guess," Marcus continued, his tone still calm, but now tinged with sharp sarcasm. "Black man walking down the street, minding his own business." That about sums it up, doesn't it? The crowd erupted into a mix of gasps and murmurs, the tension building with every passing second. The air crackled with unspoken accusations, with the weight of history, with the simmering resentment that had been simmering beneath the surface for far too long. Harding's jaw clenched as he struggled to find a response. He knew that anything he said would only make things worse. But Marcus wasn't finished. "You see, Officer Harding," Marcus said, taking a step closer, his voice low but resonant. "What you just did wasn't about keeping the streets safe. It was about power. You thought you could humiliate me, intimidate me, maybe even escalate this into something worse. But you didn't expect me to stay calm, did you?" Harding's face flushed red, but he remained silent. He knew that Marcus was right, that he had miscalculated. "You didn't expect me to be a Marine," Marcus continued, his voice steady but piercing. "You didn't expect me to have the discipline to stay level-headed, or the experience to see through your game." The crowd hung on every word, some cheering softly, others nodding in agreement. They understood what Marcus was saying. They had seen it happen countless times before. Marcus turned slightly, addressing the growing audience. "This isn't just about me," he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority. "It's about the countless times this happens to people who don't have a camera watching, who don't have the training or the platform to push back. This isn't justice, it's harassment, and it needs to stop." The crowd responded with applause, their voices rising in support. They were united in their outrage, in their demand for change. Harding, now visibly rattled, tried to interject. I was just doing my job," he stammered, his earlier bravado completely gone. He looked like a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Marcus turned back to him, his expression one of quiet disappointment. "If this is how you define your job, maybe you're not cut out for it," he said simply. The words hit Harding like a slap, and the crowd roared in agreement. People began calling out phrases like "hold him accountable" and "file a complaint." Harding looked around, his authority crumbling under the weight of public opinion. He was alone, isolated, exposed. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, holding it up for Harding to see. "Hey, race the deal, Officer Harding," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You're going to stand here in front of all these people and explain why you stopped me." Or, he let the implication hang in the air as he tapped his phone screen, indicating that he had been recording the entire interaction. Harding's eyes widened as he realized the full extent of his predicament. He was trapped, his actions documented, his fate hanging in the balance. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. "You don't owe me an apology," Marcus added, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You owe every single person here an explanation for why you thought you could abuse your power. So go ahead. Talk." The crowd fell silent, waiting for Harding's response. The officer's face was pale now, his earlier arrogance completely drained away. He shifted on his feet, clearly panicking under the weight of the moment.